supporters of Salvador Nasralla, the main presidential opposition candidate, protesting in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, on Sunday. Credit Orlando Sierra Agents France Press, Getty Images Mexico City, Hondurans marched in protest Sunday, demanding an impartial count of the results of last week's presidential election and chanting their opposition to President Juan Orlando Hernández's bid for a second term. Huge demonstrations in the capital, Tegucigalpa, and the country's industrial hub, San Pedro Sula, snaked through the streets with an almost festive air as marchers waved the red flags of the main opposition party, which has denounced what it calls fraud in the vote tally. Despite the relative calm in big cities, a political crisis has engulfed the country over the contested vote tally by the Honduran Electoral Commission. After partial results the night of the election gave the main opposition candidate, Salvador Nasralla, a lead of 5 points, the commission suspended the count for a day and a half. When it resumed, Mr. Hernández was reported to have steadily gained on Mr. Nasralla and then took a small lead, with almost 95% of the polling places counted. Pressure from international election monitors sent by the European Union and the Organization of American States persuaded the commission, which is controlled by allies of Mr. Hernández, not to announce him as the winner on Thursday. As violence and looting overtook peaceful opposition protests at the end of last week, the government responded with a crackdown, declaring a 10-day curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and sending soldiers into the residential streets to enforce it. Trapped in their homes, Hondurans protested Saturday by banging pots and pans from the balconies. Over the silence of an evening without traffic, the clanging of metal, the tooting of horns and the popping of firecrackers reverberated across the city. In some areas where people ventured to their doors to bang pots, they were met with tear gas. Negotiations between the Electoral Commission and the alliance supporting Mr. Nasralla broke down Sunday. The opposition said that the Electoral Board had refused to meet all of its demands to make the count more transparent. Nobody has any confidence in the Electoral Commission, said Teresa Flores Lanza, a human rights lawyer and former judge in San Pedro Sula. It has no legitimacy. How can they be counting under a curfew? Mr. Nasralla greeted supporters during a protest in Tegucigalpa on Sunday. Credit Henry Romero Reuters Mr. Hernández promised to respect the result of the final count. "Let's wait for the final count, according to due process under Honduran law," he wrote on Twitter. The opposition is questioning ballots from an additional 5,200 polling places, almost 30% of the total, and has asked for a recount from 3 rural departments where turnout was about 20% higher than the average in the rest of the country. The monitoring group from the Organization of American States said Sunday that the complaints over those 5,200 polling places should be considered. The Electoral Commission should find a way to be transparent and make sure that the OAS and the EU have as much access as possible, said Juan Gonzalez, a former United States State Department official who advised Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. on Central America. The final results should have international validation, he said. Some Hondurans argue that the only route out of the crisis is for the Commission to do a recount at every polling place with international supervision and with the participation of all the political parties. That is the only thing that will give a minimum of credibility to the results, said the Rev. Ismael Moreno, a prominent Jesuit priest and human rights activist. If not, he said, there could be a convulsion that nobody will be able to control. As the crackdown by security forces has escalated, Hondurans have been sharing videos of people hit by gunfire as they protested and of security forces beating people under arrest. On WhatsApp, they watched Kimberly Fonseca, a 19-year-old student from a poor neighborhood of Tegucigalpa, as she lay dying after the military police shot at protesters on Friday night. With social networks, it's really easy to know what's going on, said Gabriel Zuniga Vélez, 27, a student who went to the march in Tegucigalpa. There's still the hope that this can be turned around. We need to show how many of us there really are, Mr. Vélez said that he was not very involved in politics, but that he had been moved by corruption in the government to vote for Mr. Nasralla. The government has been corrupt, he said. This has been our reality for centuries. But if politicians keep stealing, he added, it gets past people's breaking point.